that you need healing. You get the resources, the tools, the people that you need to start the healing journey so that not only will you be better, but you will attract better. Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Purpose and Powerful podcast. I'm here tonight with my wonderful co-hosts, Thomas and Miss Deborah. How are you this evening?
Doing well.
Hello. I am doing,
Fantastic.
I'm driving. I'm driving mad.
Well, tonight, what we're talking about is breaking chains, healing from generational trauma for lasting love. And what does that actually mean? That means that we're going to dive deep into something that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not, generational trauma and its impact on how we show up in love and in relationships. So, for many of us, especially for the single folks, the patterns of our past, whether from our families, our communities, or even pressures that we get from society, it's helped us shape how we approach love, how we approach trust, what do we feel and respond to in terms of connection. But what is the good news? That means that you have the power to break those chains. So, to just kind of start it off, what do you think, and anyone can answer, is the number one thing keeping most people from breaking free from the cycles of dysfunction when it comes to love?
That's an interesting way to put that question because you said cycles of dysfunction,
That's right.
and that's that's might it might not be a dysfunction. It might be, it might be a protection mechanism. It might be a set of desires or things that you want out of a marriage, but those are not dysfunctions. Those are just things that you have placed uh into your desire bag or to your requirement bag that that causes things not to work for others. um so I don't know, I just think dysfunction is a hard word.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I'm not going to say it's a dysfunction, but it's probably one of the things when we're in relationships. And several podcasts back, you mentioned that you have a list of things that you're always looking for in someone. And so what you end up doing a lot of times is that you, consciously or subconsciously, you keep going to that list when you pick someone that you think might be your mate. And so what happens is that, say for instance, if you're looking for, you always like a tall pretty boy, your mate might not be a tall pretty boy. He might be a mediocre looking guy, I mean, he'll still be easy on the eyes, but he's not going to be the pretty boy. And then he might be short. So sometimes when you start seeing that, one of the things as you're in the relationship, start looking at the different things of the similarities and where possibly, because each relationship is teaching you something. And so if you start looking at, well, okay, I was looking at the tall, pretty boy, but there's something about tall, pretty boys that just don't work. And so maybe if I break my what is it? Break my I want to say break my cycle. It's not a cycle, but if I
This,
pardon, what'd you say?
I said, break that dysfunction.
Break that dysfunction. But if you turn around and you look at something different, something that's not necessarily familiar to you, because you get comfortable in that. So you get out your comfort zone. Let's put it that way, because this list is your comfort zone. So if you get outside that comfort zone, then you just might find that mate.
And
I
I
love
mean,
it.
and I think one of the things that a lot of people have, even in marriages, and I call it, um, I don't know if this would be called, it can be looked at as a dysfunction, but insecurity. Insecurity is one of the things that I believe in a lot of, that keeps a lot of people out of relationships because they don't feel secure in the relationship. And at the same time, they're insecure about themselves. So the insecurities on both sides, um, and that insecurity breeds the lack of trust. It breeds, denial, because now you're trying to say, well, I'm secure about who I am. Really, are you? And it actually brings on the inability to step outside of your zone, um, and try something different because well, this is all we are being, and you know um, and that work that happens inside of marriages too. I mean, I can talk about us, I think, and not get shot up too bad. So it's like, I was, when me and my wife got married, guess who had done my clothes for the last 27 years of my life?
Your
Take a
mama.
wild guess. See how she
Your
said that?
mom.
See how she said that? Your mama.
She had to help you out. She had to help
You,
everybody
you
out.
had you heard all that? And so she was like, well, I'm going to get you some shirts. I said, that's all right. Don't worry about it. Mama get them for me. And I said that before I even thought about it. And she was like,
Wow.
well, your mama can get all your clothes for the rest of your life. And I'm like, oh,
The whole thing is too. The clincher was we went shopping and we went to buy his clothes, and that's when he was like, well, that's what my mama wants. My mama don't pick that. My mama don't. And I'm like, well, you let your mama buy your clothes then.
and so with that, you know, now you walk into a relationship and a guy says that to you, what do? I don't want that. That's a mama's boy. I ain't trying to fight his mama for the rest of his life. Um, and that's it. But there's insecurity, but also that's insecurity in yourself and saying, hey, I'm woman enough to take that place. Or I'm woman enough that, as I get to know him, if he's the one that God has for me, you heard what I just said, that God has for me to marry, then, we can work through that. And that's what we have done, I think, to a certain extent. And it takes time. You're not gonna change. You don't change the direction of a ship, unless it's a speedboat, and that still take time. In a matter of moments, it takes time to change it. Um, and a lot of times with, as you said, dysfunctions, the dysfunctions are sometimes generational from a sense of, uh, they're generational from a sense of, um, they happen from your mom, your parents to you. But a lot of times dysfunctions are the first generation, which is you, because of your life experiences, things that are happening in your life, things that happen in your relationships, things that has happened in relationships around you that you're like, yeah, I don't want that in mine, or that's what I want in mine. I want this. Well, you know, Miss B and Mr. Thomas, man, I heard their story of how they met, and that's what I want. I want that first time love, you know, love at first sight. I want that. And that's not a dysfunction. Well, I ain't love him at first sight. I ain't, but love is something. It's just like I was telling one couple, love is not, love can be love at first sight, but love is something that grows on you. You choose who to love, and you choose how you love. And that is a choice that God gave us. And we have the ability to allow love to grow. Um, that's why, even when Jesus asked Peter, Peter, do you love me? Peter said, I love you as a brother. Then Jesus said, do you agape love me? Do you love me with all your heart, mind, and soul? He said, no, I love you as a brother. But then Jesus came back and met him where he was. Peter, do you love me as a brother? And he says, yes. Well, he didn't say yes. He said, Jesus, you know my heart. You know what I feel. You know what about me. Search me and prove who I am. And that's what, in one sense, we have to do in a relationship. We have to understand the heart of the person and see if that person can do truly love me and at what level do they love me. Do they love me as a friend? Because that's a dysfunction, as you would say, a dysfunction because we're trying to make that something that happens overnight. I got to truly be in love with this person. No, you have to learn, you have to see where the depth of their love is and then help each other build that to the point that you have a life together. Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Oh, praise God. Look at you cooking. I love it. So let's just take a step back and let's talk about this generational trauma idea. Um, and basically, in the dysfunction part of it is really it's patterns of pain, patterns of hurt, whether it's passed down from one generation to the next. So, like how you may have watched, if you're a guy, you watch how your father and your uncle and brothers treated women, treated different things, how they acted in a relationship, what role they took in relationship. Women, you know, if a mom or auntie, grandma, somebody gave you some bad relationship advice, you spend half your life trying to figure out that the advice is just not the right thing. At the end of the day, what it really just kind of comes down to is trying to understand and identify that the information it's caused you to suffer. It's actually created a trauma. So one of the things, for example, I can speak to this in my own life. I had said this to my own mother, and she wouldn't care if I told it because I will. But I'd said most of the things that she told me about men and my youth and the different things and has really helped shape my independence today really came a lot from seeing how relationship nuances were between relationships she saw, whether with my grandmother, dating issues in her own life, to say, oh, okay, and everything that she felt like she probably didn't have a choice or how her life was patterned was kind of like, oh, if I could do it over again or if I could do it a different way, let me just go ahead and tell you about it. So I think it was years of my life before I kind of like figured out that while I love my independence and I love how she shaped me to be that way, it caused me some issue in terms of learning to be more soft when it came to men because she basically raised me to don't need one. And that's great. But how I need a man is just not how most women have been taught. Like, that's your provider, that's this person, that's that person. In my makeup, my mate is my partner. He's just not my all in all. Like, I don't rely on this man to do and be every single thing. So I define my softness in being who I was, yet realizing what my needs for a mate were. And like the list that Miss Deborah reflected on previously, see, you know, when you're young and you're early 20s, late teens, and different things, sure, you want them tall, dark, and handsome and all the things, but like, you know, 20s, the type of woman you become. If you're growing at 30, you don't want the same kind of man. I don't even want the same type of man at 47 that I wanted at 37. And it's just because you change and you evolve and your needs change and evolves also. So even with that, you have to, you know, be willing to recognize through the different relationships where your struggles are, where your issues are, and where your pattern of behaviors actually needs some change. So I can be more soft as long as I have a leader of a man in front of me, but I can recognize that. So I don't have to put on my list that I need the man to be a hard worker, hardworking, trustworthy, those things. That's the type of man I attract. It's just pretty much science for me now. So I can relax on some things and get to learn and love him for the man that he is. But there are just some things that are always going to be non-negotiable. But I don't attract men that don't meet that the basic minimum requirements that I have. And it's just because I just never in the position or in the place to meet a man below the station of what I'm looking for. So, but again, that's just with growth and time. You learn to love yourself as you're learning to love other people. And then when you really have a value system and really understand who God's making you, who's made you to be, as you're learning that, then you start to get an idea and a clue about who he has to put you with, because together it's ministry, right? You iron sharpens iron, and that person is supposed to make you better in ways. So no, they're not supposed to be exactly a carbon copy of who you are. That's how we become stronger, is because we're paired with people that become the answer to the weaknesses or the things that we're less strong in.
Hmm. So I got a crazy question.
Bring it on.
All right. What's the difference between a woman that wants a Boaz and the Proverbs 31 woman?
I don't think that there's a difference in the woman except in the role and the makeup of that particular function and relationship. Like, what is your calling in that relationship? A lot of times women get so thrilled by the idea of a Boaz because they're like, oh, I'm not going to have to work. The man's going to be wealthy. And I'm just going to have this whole, he's going to have everything already set up for me. He has the money, he has the cars, he has the house, he has this, he has that. And they're not looking at the loving submission and the godly counsel and the wisdom of Ruth and so many things that Ruth had learned to submit and love well before she ever came with Naomi on a trip. But she trusted the word of God that was in Naomi's mouth. So there's a lot of things in that story of Boaz, but people just pick out the pieces they think are alluring. Well, in my lifetime and experience, what I've seen mostly with women that have where the man is the breadwinner and they're like at the home role, their role isn't so much less, they're just called to something different. Whereas a Proverbs 31 woman, I always liken myself to that and try to understand that, I'm not the Ruth in the story with Boaz. I'm more like the Proverbs 31 woman because that lady has a lot of functions. She got a lot going on. And so even in that, it never said that she was cooking the food or she was just doing these things. It was in the management role. And it says that her husband and her children rise up and call her blessed, right? She's handling a lot of things. She's wearing a lot of hats. I think she has about 9 jobs in that within that length of verses there. But the overall goal is the woman in Proverbs 31 and the woman Ruth in the story of Boaz, these women completely understand their function, their purpose, and their assignment. And so, no matter which role, even if it's a situation where the woman makes the most money and the man's the one at home, if you understand your role in their relationship, you understand your role and assignment that God has given you with regard to your purpose, as long as you're serving that 100% to the best of your ability and every day you're striving to do well in that, I don't think that you'll end up being disappointed. I think when we decide for ourselves that we have to have it like this with this type of man, and then he has to be doing these things, that's not a mate, that's a robot. It's not real. It's not realistic. So you just find yourself in generational trauma of being disappointed because you're like, okay, no women in my family ever had a good man. And I can't, we always draw this. Well, change the attraction, right? making yourself more attractive to attract the thing that you want, that you ultimately want, and to want it for the right reason. I always say some of the same men that I would be attracted to, there's a woman out there who um, wants that same type of man, but just for a different reason, for a different purpose, you know. In her mind, he's Prince Charming. I'm just, in my mind, he's Prince Partner, you know. It's just different. But understanding
And so,
what your calling is really going to help you not be stressed out and not crash out because the man you have been assigned to is not the one you thought in your list was tall, dark, and handsome and all the things.
so, and you're spot on, almost. And I said that from a sense of people say they want Boaz, but they don't look at Ruth as being a Proverbs 31 woman. But Ruth was a Proverbs 31 woman, but just not put into position to be that in the story that we read of Ruth, because that was pre Proverbs 31 woman, because she was being sought and not one that had been been a been found. And we found Boaz in the finding mode, or her finding mode, as she did run a household, as she did make sure that Naomi was great, that was taken care of, as she did make sure that she carried herself in a way that made Naomi proud. So everything that she did was to build herself to be that Proverbs, to walk into the role of a Proverbs 31 woman. So now, as you were saying, you're looking for a partner, but you're still looking for the same thing as a Boaz, from a sense of you're looking for a protector. You're looking for somebody not physical, because all the things that you talked about was physical. But the spiritual is still there that you need and you desire. And you are looking for your desire is more for a spiritual mate than for a physical mate. So you can't call him a partner, because your partner be the man in your relationship and do the things spiritually that you need done. And so that's where now I would call it dysfunction, because you're looking at it from a different perspective, from a physical. We are spiritual people living in a what?
Natural
Physical
body.
world. But we put
Mhm.
so we put all of our requirements physically instead of spiritually. And my wife can say yay or nay, but I strive to do the physical, but I also strive to be that spiritual person that knows her spiritually, and to strive to be there spiritually for her. And that's hard, because the spiritual is hard. I can do this physical easily, but the spiritual is hard, because it's you allowing others to get inside of your spiritual space, and you allowing others to you allowing me allowing her to get into my spiritual space, so that she understands each other spiritually. And that's where people don't that's where marriages, and I believe a lot of relationships fall apart, because they always want to get physical and never want to get spiritual. If they focus on the spiritual part first, a lot of these dysfunctions will be exposed and can be worked out, because now you see where he or she is coming from spiritually, and then you can work with the physical, because the physical going to change. The physical always change. The spiritual don't change. It's a transformation. It ain't a change. It's a transformation. They got to work that out. That's why Paul said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Because that beast inside of you, you don't know him, and you got to figure it out, and take you a lifetime. Okay, that's all I'm going to say.
Dr. Jabril, so good evening and good to see you, sir. Here's a question for you, and I know you have some questions of your own too. You're wonderfully married now. You were married before. You had some experience dating. For you as a man, when did it stop for you being less about the physical and then concentration was more on spiritual? Like, where, at what age or what was your life at the time when you decided to redirect your energy? Then it wasn't about a, as Steve Harvey says, big booty and a small. It was more about, I am looking for this wife, right? This makeup, and that's who I need in my life.
Ooh, yeah, that's fine.
Great question, but I want to be honest with you. I don't think that that's ever gone away. I ask for everything that I want, especially at this stage of my life at 50. I mean, and at that time, I think that was around 10 years ago, I asked that because I'm going to do what I want in terms of making myself look physically appealing. So I'll make my best efforts to be healthy inside and out. So I don't know if it's really changed because you can be specific and we don't have to settle. If that's what we want, then go for it. I mean, God can hear your request, whatever He places you with is who you want. But it should be good if you have that relationship with God to ask for what you want and what you're asking for. Make sure that you have that mirror image. And so I was very satisfied with what I received, but I knew that when I look at some of my other pictures from the past, my wife had said that she wouldn't have dated me, and that I had a funny look that she didn't. And we know that she's definitely into the spirit. So she was very honest that I wouldn't have been the Boaz or somebody that she was praying for. And I looked at those pictures and I thought about it. I said, wow, I mean, because you can transform. But it all started within. What I wanted, I had to have within and be that person to attract whatever relationship that I wanted and to be confident in that. So for me, that's the truth that you're asking for the real truth.
What
So
was the change though? Because at first, as a young man, it is more about physical. And then to think spiritually, that's a mindset.
well,
Like to say, oh, okay, well, let me
about
transition. I'm
about
older, that kind of thing.
7 years ago, I still wanted the physical, but I added the spirit. I asked for more. I was more specific and I was more about substance, but that made me that I needed to have a stronger relationship with God. So it started with that because before the women I were dating, I wouldn't ask God for permission. And I was running into trouble. I say, oh my God, help get me out of the situation. But so it had to be something where he and I agreed upon. And before I wasn't asking for that. I was just going for what I wanted, what I thought was best for me, better for me at the time. So I'd say about 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, I would say that when you start going for the spiritual, you're actually already in the relationship, and you've gotten through your likes and you're like, okay, I like this guy. And you just kind of grow into it, because I know truly and honestly, my husband and I were married for quite some time. And uh, I can't really pinpoint it, but I know several years ago, all of a sudden, I just basically, and I think it was probably maybe right before the time that I actually announced my own calling into the ministry,
Mm.
that I found that, because he's a busy guy, does a lot of stuff. And I always look at it and I was like, he's the type person, he wants to go out and run, do whatever. He just wants to make certain that when he gets home, he's got a wife there. And I found my, I found, yeah, I'm serious. And he just doesn't want to come home. He doesn't want to come home to an empty house. And so, I had to learn to do my own thing. But then in trying to make a connection with him, I found that if I started communicating with him more so on a spiritual level, then I had his attention.
Yeah.
And so then our, because of that, then our relationship also evolved. But in the meantime, while that was happening, God was working with me on a spiritual level. And I'm quite certain that he was not aware of where I truly was until I actually started, talking with him on that level. And so things actually got better. So I think it's one more of those things of that you grow into. And then, as you said, as you get older, because when you're in your teens and your early 20s and possibly into your 30s, you're not necessarily thinking that I'm looking for a mate on a spiritual level, on a level. I mean, we might say, okay, I want someone who's in the church, not, and so that's the start of it. But so you're putting yourself in the same place because you basically both have the same type foundation. If you I want someone who's been brought up in the church, and so he was brought up in the church. I've been brought up in the church, so we had kind of, in one sense, I'm not going to say an even playing field, but we were playing in the same area, as opposed to, I mean, I did date some guys that uh, did not have a church upbringing, uh, but they came with their own special set of questions, a special set of issues that you had to try to relate, and you know, you, it didn't work, but eventually what I found is that over time, and I've just learned this in my lifetime, is that over time, and Erica, you said it earlier, uh, as you grow and you mature and you get different experiences behind you, then you as a person change. Because I'm like Dr. Jabril, back in the day, if people had known me back in the day, they would look and say, "Is that you? That was you?" Because I was totally almost antisocial at one point. So, I mean, I'd have a neighbor would come to the house and I'd open the door and I'd let her in, and she's a close neighbor and she want a hug. And I'm like, no, no. But now one of the first things I do with most people, I hug. But back in the day, I didn't hug you. No way, no how. So we evolve, as you said, we evolve into the people that we become. And it's just along that particular line. Um, I want to say that when you talk about the generational trauma, and I wouldn't say generational, I wouldn't call it trauma, but because your parents raise you based on the experiences that they have had in their life and the influences that they have had in their life. And we take those things and we shouldn't necessarily make them as gospel when we go in our lives, but we take them and say, okay, well, I'm going to start here. And then I'm going to learn, use that as a stepping stone in my learning, because of course some of their stuff is tainted by their experiences and by their traumas. And so we can't make it ours, but we can use it as a stepping stone as we go and we evolve ourselves. So but like I said, that's when the spiritual, even though I was there, a lot of times I didn't talk to people like that. I mean, and even as an example, I hung out with a preacher and his family and everything. And one time we were working with the youth, and they sat up and they said, "Well, hey, you work for Honeywell. I want can you go and talk with them and see if you can get a female engineer that will come and be on a panel and talk to our youth?" And I just looked at them and laughed. And they said, "Why?" And then they said, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "I'm a female engineer." But they didn't realize it because of the way that I carry myself. And they said, "But you don't talk like one." And I said, "I'm not in an atmosphere where I need to talk like one." you know. So it's just one of those things that, like I said, you evolve. You learn how to evolve. You meet the experience of where you are, the situation of where you are. And so you take the lessons learned from your parents, and then you build on those. And then sometimes you might find that like, okay, mama was this way, but even though she was that way, I'm not going to be that way. You have to make a conscious decision. And sometimes I find that a lot of people sometimes they don't make those decisions that, hey, I'm over 21 now. I can I can do what I want, and I can change some things about the way I was brought up, and formulate my own thinking from there. So
Okay.
Okay, that's real. You're looking looking like you have some comments and questions. So what's on your mind, sir?
Well, I just wanted and before I leave and just ask, just saying that that spiritual, I mean, like you said, you grow in spiritual, whatever you want or desire, you gotta have a stronger connection with God, especially as the head of the Boaz. And whatever you're asking for, you gotta make sure you're that. And I'd say it 10 times because of the things that you're gonna have to do, the grace. And it's never 50-50 and all of that. It's gonna be times when our wives will hold us up. So it all goes together. I'm seeing that. I'm experiencing it now. Sometimes I may forget something, but because I poured in so much into my wife and she's heard it so many times where I thought she might not have heard or tune me out, she's able to pick that up and pick us up. And it just shows once again how God knows best. So I would challenge anyone, make sure you pick the right mate and think of it as something long term, not short term, not seasonal, like you're something you're renting, but something you own and you own it together and you move forward through whatever hardships or whatever it is, because there are going to be some, and the best is yet to happen or come, and that's why God assigned you to that person. But make sure that God picked that person and know who you are first, so that it'll make sense. It may not make sense at first, but if you feel in your spirit, it will start to make sense more and more.
That's true.
And that's why I'd say some of the people that you may have seen, and I know we've talked offline, Erica, they might have seemed like they had it and they had the resume, but it didn't take long for God to say, nope. You to say, wait a minute, I'm a second interview. Can I get one more? God, he said, ah. As we gotten older, we know if you give a second interview, then it's going to be a third, and it's going to be whatever. And just understand, if that was their representative and they couldn't even make it, imagine if you decided to go against God's will and be with that person. That doesn't make any sense. It's like hiring someone that you know is not qualified, but you just want to fill a position. What usually happens? You end up firing them, or they quit on you. I don't know if anybody understands or if the audience understands, but that's really what I have to say and all I have to say. And how you do some things is how you do everything. So even in my business life, I can't get desperate. I mean, it's better to, sometimes God may not want me to have that staff and all of that. And what I've noticed when he's moved things away from me, I've gotten closer to God and seen everything that I needed and realized I didn't even need that. That was more, maybe my ego wanted to just put a,
mm,
say you're making a certain amount of money. So in your mind, you think you need to hire all these people when that's not even the next step. He wants to preserve us, or jumping into another program just because you made some money. He's saying, wait a minute, what about some of those debts? Knock those things down. Do something else. Stop running around. Have more time and get yourself healthy. So all of the answers are right in front of us, and they're also in the great book. That's some extra stuff that
Yes, they are.
just came to
I
me.
love the interview phases. It definitely with evolution is so much easier to identify the things that you don't need. That's being the number one. What you don't need, then you can be like, I don't want that because it doesn't. because I don't need that, right? So
Mhm.
even with that, like I said, it's just easier just swipe left. Let me just go on to the next. No one has time for it because you learn more about your, that you attract people where you are with who you are. So if you're looking, if you know that this is just a temporary position for you and you know long term, this is what you need, this is a person that you've been called to be, this is your assignment, this is your purpose, then you need to make sure you got somebody with you that is going in the same direction.
Right.
Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure. So
And
I like it.
and I'm going to ask this question, Jabril. What is the great book?
Oh, the Bible. My
Okay,
apologies.
I just want to make sure we are talking about the same thing. Cause great book, be the Quran or something else, and then we're gonna have another conversation.
No,
But
I have
anyway,
to. I wouldn't draw like that. I apologize. So I will
uh,
if we're still on, but I just want to thank everybody for letting me on. It's always great to see you and to see another friend
amen,
from Arrington's. Good to see you. And thank you.
amen.
Fantastic.
Well, hey, so Ed, I just want to throw this last thing out, and I would be quiet. Um, when we look at dysfunctions, it's in the eyes of the beholder. For one, it's a dysfunction, and others, it's a way of life. It's what they've been grown up to, what they've lived. It's their worldview, which is not really a dysfunction based on them unless they consider that themselves. So we have to make sure that as we look at dysfunctions in others, as well as we look at dysfunctions for ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing? And then go back and understand what that is and why we're doing it, and to see if it's something we need to correct. Because there's a reason why we do what we do. Okay, that's
It's
it.
a wisdom. Closing thoughts, Miss Deborah.
I'm good.
I think that
Final statement, Dr. Jabril.
well, I didn't know you knew that was my final statement. Again, make sure that you get in tune with your relationship within. Forgive yourself for anything that you have done or haven't done, and attract the mate that God has for you will be there. That's the bottom line. You can't cheat this process. It's already written, so you might as well follow the blueprint. So
Very insightful words of wisdom. So thank you, everyone.
yeah,
And with that, our whole goal for you is that you learn that you need healing. You get the resources, the tools, the people that you need to start the healing journey so that not only will you be better, but you will attract better. Join us next time. Our next show is Faith Divides, addressing spiritual misalignment in relationships on Sunday, February 2nd. That's also, I believe, the week before the Super Bowl, or
Whoop,
maybe
whoop.
on the Super Bowl.
for those commanders.
But we look forward to joining you for another insightful conversation. Thanks again for all of our guests, co-hosts, wonderful co-hosts. Thank you so much for everything that you do, your contributions, your words of wisdom, and you participating with us on this purpose and powerful journey. And we just bid you all a good night, and we'll see you soon.